Greetings, everybody. Thank you for joining another episode of the 3DMJ podcast. I am joined today by Coach Alberto Nunez and Eric, our Director of Science. Welcome, my friend.
Pleasure to be here.
So today, we're going to talk about my favorite body part. Hasn't always been my favorite body part, but it is now, because largely it is the one body part that I have actually improved and now feel competent to train. And our hope is that we can do the same for y'all and help you with your wingspan, your lats. And the way that I think I kind of want to start this out is proper training of the lats, because I arguably did not properly train my lats for possibly the first decade of my bodybuilding career. And what I would like to do is kind of include another one of the bodybuilders that largely brought up his lats, Alberto Nunez. Seems to me that if I recall correctly, somebody told me that you broke the internet last year, or maybe it was the year before, when you got back on stage with what largely looked like a turtle shell had been stapled to your back, where your lats are positioned. So, let's kick this off with training, my friend. How did you manage to make such a dramatic metamorphosis of your back in your last competition season?
Well, I think for starters, I had a similar back when I was like an amateur going into the pro ranks, but it's just a lot of the things that I was doing that yielded those results. Like I got right on accident and they weren't necessarily sustainable. So I think the cheaty rows to some extent, like it's like, I think those worked. And I definitely noticed that. I remember my training partner at the time, Gerald Williams, he went off to have a short but pretty decent IFBB career. Him telling me, he's like, dude, you just got to throw bent over rows in there. Like, trust me. And like, he's like, they don't have to be super strict. Like, just get after it. And I did it. And same as him, like, yeah, like it worked until it didn't, basically. It worked until I was prepping and I hurt myself. And I think they might have played a role in that. So yeah, I think I got a lot of things right before, but I didn't necessarily know what it was. And that's what science kind of does for you. It kind of, doesn't give you all the answers, but there's causation and there's correlation and that's what science kind of does for you. So taking a slightly different approach now, I can see why certain things that I did then worked, why they worked. And yeah, it's been smooth sailing ever since. And we're going to get to go over those things and what they are today. But yeah, I'm glad I got it figured out, because there was a good time, a good time there between like 2011 to like 2019 that I'm just like, why is my back end worse? Like I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. I'm like, I think I'm being smart about my exercise selection. I'm training hard. I'm training with strict form, but it just seems to get like a little worse like year after year. And I can't do the bonehead stuff that I was doing before. And I think a lot of bodybuilders, as we go through this, will kind of have those aha moments where they're like, I think I'm doing the same right now. And hopefully they get to learn from my mistakes, essentially. So yeah, that's my story. I took a step back, but I think we fixed that situation a little bit. And this time around, it's actually something that's sustainable.
Interesting. So yeah, I was not expecting that. So you felt like the kind of cheaty barbell rows got you the foundation, would you say? And it was maybe what, just throwing around the weight and maybe the novelty of it is what kind of got that foundation, but it only got you so far.
So I think a lot of it is because the strength curve on the pulling movements is screwed, right? So I was using load that, even though I was getting assistance from my hip extensors, that's my main beef with the
Momentum.
barbell row. It's just like simply that inertia when you're going from like the last part of the eccentric into the concentric, like, and again, the fact that it's much more weight than I could bring to like my chest in a strict fashion. I think that is what kind of fixed some of the things that are, I guess, inherently wrong with the movement, or just limitations that you have to take into consideration when it comes to any pulling movements. That the strength curve is going to be the inverse of, say, a pressing movement. Um, so yeah, it worked because of that primarily, because I wasn't as focused on like the contraction. I was more focused on looking cool for sure, like in the weight room. Like here I am with like 3 plates and some change, but but, but it was working, right? It just so happened that, like, as I was adding weight and my technique maybe got a little worse if instead of better, like, I was growing a bigger back. So, yeah, I was kind of being like an asshole in some ways. I kinda saw that, yeah, like, my technique's gotten worse during the last 50 pounds that I've added, but I swear to you, like, I'm not lying, like, my back looks better than it did 6 months ago. Um, but again, that's where science comes into play. And like as much as you have these people nowadays, like talking about like, oh, we don't need science. If anything, it's holding us back. The bros have gone it right. It's like what science does for you is it figures out what about your methods. What is it? What is closer to that exact thing that you're doing that is yielding the results, right? It's no different than the bodybuilders in the days of Arnold where they would cut out dairy and they're like, it gets you leaner when you cut out dairy and you replace it with fish. It's like, yeah, but using science, you can evaluate the situation a bit further and you're like, oh, it's the caloric restriction, right? They're missing a bunch of calories. So yeah, I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that it worked, but it also almost snapped me in half at some point. So I had to figure out a different way of going about it. Yeah, that's what I
Wow,
was doing.
cool.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, I mean, since we have Eric here, and we did find out that it was not the magic of dairy and the magic of fish that was actually the reason that people got leaner. Eric, kind of dissect that a little bit and kind of put that on the PowerPoint presentation and tell us about what Berto just talked about.
No, absolutely. And the cool thing about this is I don't have to speculate because I was training with Berto during the time when he was getting his barbell row up to 4 plates and trying to do the same thing myself, mimicking that a bit. Not completely though. I didn't buy into the Kool-Aid and I was kind of like, this seems, like far too like, is this exercise really? We're standing up too straight, yada yada. But one of the things, like when if I was to, for those who haven't seen old, corners of YouTube where you can see Berto rowing 4 plates, what he's kind of describing and how this intersects with the force curve or the resistance profile of a row is that at the bottom, right at the end of the eccentric before he would start the concentric, he was pretty much in an RDL position. Like he didn't stay standing upright the whole time. He would stand more upright into the concentric. But at the point at the very bottom, peak kind of quote unquote eccentric, the start of the range of motion, he's keeping his arms attached to his body while holding 405 pounds and having to load the lats a little bit in their most lengthened position. And then as he gets to that point where it starts to stick after a few degrees of shoulder extension, that's when the hips come in. He stands up straight and it's kind of like a partial RDL. So is it the most effective way to load the lats by doing like RDL into hip thrust power clean thing? No, but I think when we look back on it, we can see that, oh, he actually was loading the lats a bit at their most lengthened position. Yeah, there was then momentum in it. Now it's kind of a full body movement after that. But if you compare that to all of the other exercises, if we think about your other kind of quote unquote bodybuilding staples like the seated cable row, lat pull down, chin, single arm dumbbell row, all of those, they're so hard at lockout. And the way people use momentum typically is not conducive to actually loading that last position. It's a little more explosive, herky jerky. And especially if you use strict form, you're thinking about a rep counts when I can get that dumbbell to touch my chest. I'm on that bench, 1 foot down, your typical dumbbell row. You're not going to be, turning quite as much. So it's one of the few movements, and it's probably by far the most fatiguing, least, efficient way of getting there, to where if you just load it up a whole lot, and you don't just stand up completely the whole time and do like a really, really partial range of motion row, you are getting some loading to the lengthened position. So for those who are kind of maybe hearing a lot of words they don't understand, when I talk about resistance curve or resistance profile, what I'm talking about is in the range of motion of an exercise, when is it hard? And when we think about the muscle groups which typically are not lagging on people. We briefly discussed maybe talking about chest training before we jumped into this, and we were like, hey, you just kind of do it, like, and if your chest is behind, it's either structural or maybe you just need to throw in some flies or cable crossovers or some isolation work because you got, Kevin Lavoni, front delts. But that's because when you think about where is a bench press, chest press, fly, anything hard, it's right out of the gates when the pec is lengthened. But it's the exact opposite for the back. Getting your chin over the bar in a pull-up, hard. Getting that bar to touch your chest or abdomen without jerking it, hard. So that's when the muscle is shortened versus lengthened when we're talking about the lat versus the pec. So that means that we have to be a little more intelligent if we're seeing the traditional bread and butter exercises aren't helping the back get developed. And we need to do some things which are a little more favorable for that resistance curve. An option is to load up the most amount of weight you can RDL and then get into that position like Berto was doing. But as he described, perhaps not the most sustainable or, the least fatiguing exercise. And that's where we've kind of seen this quote unquote biomechanics revolution, where people are looking at, okay, well, how do I put the lats into a greater, more stretched position? Oh, shoot, the lats actually attach all the way up and down my spine. Maybe we can even consider to have these different subdivisions that aren't in your traditional kind of personal trainer manual, like the iliac lat, quote unquote, or, like basically upper, lower lats. Oh, there's the teres major. Oh, shit, there's rhomboids. Oh, my God, there's your mid traps. Oh, the rear delt's doing something there, too. There's a lot of layered muscle groups there, and it's complex. So when someone has a quote unquote weak back, it can be for a lot of reasons, structural or otherwise. So it is probably, I don't know if you guys would agree with me, the most commonly underdeveloped exercise, or typically most common like missing piece among physique athletes. And I'm actually in the same boat as you, Brad. I would say my 2023 physique was the beginning of my back coming up. And I'm, fingers crossed, hoping that I can maybe not have a full-blown Ninja Turtle transformation like Berto and this year, but people will be like, oh shit, his back has actually come up substantially. Because I was a bread and butter, I deadlift, I do barbell rows, I do chin-ups and weighted chin-ups guy for so long. And I had pretty damn well-developed portions of my back, but pretty clear, like there was like my erectors, then my upper back. And then between, it was kind of like, what's going on there? You're missing that little key piece, So anyway, yeah, that's kind of what we're talking about. It's essentially, how do we find better resistance profiles? How do we find a way to provide a challenge at a longer muscle length? And that is a little, easier said than done when it comes to the back.
Yeah, that's good stuff right there. I would be remiss. I feel like we'd be missing something if I didn't at least talk about kind of that volume and frequency component, right? Because we'll get back to this. We'll get back to this lengthened, muscle targeting, I guess you might say. But I feel like a little bit of a bridge, you might say, between the 2008, 9, 10, 11 Brad, what I learned from Eric, and was able to build upon that and improve it from like 11, 12, 13, and 14, was largely volume and frequency. I mean, I went from largely the max OT guy to where I was training back once a week, and in phases like twice a week. And I remember vividly after the 2011 Natural Olympia, I was just kind of sitting there in the old Healthy Bodies gym with Eric and kind of just mapping out how should I spend these next 3 years. And we did. We largely talked about frequency, more so than anything. I mean, really talked about frequency more so than sets and effort and all that kind of stuff. Largely because we were just breaking into the infancy of effort and RPE and things like that. But that did give me some nice improvements. I went from like basically, and posing was, I have to, kind of give props to Jeff there too, because he helped me pose my lats. That was also a big component of it. But going from largely like 1.5 times a week for most of the years to 3 times a week, that's what got me my improvement from 2011 to 2014 when I was actually able to show lats. Now, my 2014 physique was largely not as good in other areas, but if nothing else, at least that area I made improvement with, right? And that's the frustrating about natural bodybuilding is it takes 3 years to make an improvement, but you can also screw something else up in 3 years. But that's a different podcast for a different time. But yeah, that frequency is what got me the kind of narrow Brad that was always shredded, and largely fat free on stage to actually having V taper, and having a little bit of that symmetry, that X frame. Um, so yeah, I mean, I kind of want to make sure that I at least do that some justice. But again, it only got me so far, and yeah, before we start getting into the lengthened stuff and the targeted stuff and stretching things in a certain way with twisting of the body, let's just talk about that for, a few minutes and talk about what, kind of largely was my main source of improvement, during those early years of Brad's evolution and back training.
Yeah, frequency is kind of another observational in the trenches band-aid for how hard it is to develop the back because of what I think my hypothesis is that the resistance profiles are just not as good. We can go back to one of the many Poliquinisms where it's like, have a 2-to-1 ratio of like pulling to pressing. And you would hear him sometimes say that's because, it's to keep the shoulders healthy, but other times that's what you need to do to get them to grow effectively. Um, and if you take a traditional kind of bro split where you're hitting your back once per week, even if you're doing like 4 sets per exercise and you do like a pull down, a barbell row, another type of row, and then you count your deadlifts, like you're going to kind of get to a point where you've done is what you can in a session and you're maybe getting 12, 16 sets per week tops. And that's a good amount of volume, don't get me wrong. But even doing that, it's the rare bodybuilder who you talk to and say, yeah, I have sore lats. Like my actual like mid belly meat of my lats are actually sore. They might notice in certain areas, they might get a little bit of upper back soreness. They're definitely going to get some lumbar soreness with a trainer like Berto was back in the day. But they will rarely get that meat of the lat, kind of soreness that you would get easily in your biceps, triceps, chest, hamstring, quads, etc. And I think a large part of that is that if most of the exercises you're doing are challenging in a shortened position, it's going to be less stimulative, but also less fatiguing. So that's a double-edged sword. And one way to kind of, paint over that is to make up for poor quality with a high quantity. And I mean, how many times do you see people try like the pull-ups every day program? I did that for a while and I noticed it improved my back, but it perpetuated the imbalances. So in 2011, after I got on stage, I saw that and I was like, God, my back's weak. So 2012, I spent that whole year doing pull-ups every day. And I did that a lot. And I started doing the same thing like you did, Brad. And I did notice improvements, but it kind of gave me like a more robust T taper than a V taper. There was still that missing kind of mid-back link. So frequency and higher volumes and even training closer to failure, kind of those big rocks of programming variables, that can be used when you have access to poor exercise selection. But I think it can only get you so far if you're really not actually qualitatively tapping into achieving a certain degree of muscle fatigue in the target muscles. Like if you think about like what you would have to do to actually feel that fatigue mid back in the lat using a lot of not so great exercises, especially in the same era when we were getting tuned into let's clean up our form, let's be a little less caveman-y crap, we're on camera, we're a 3D muscle journey, we need to be respectable, we're becoming these venerated vets, we can't be just, lunk alarming it all day, right? I remember doing like, 4 sets 3 times per week on cable roads. And even if I'm going real, real close to failure, I would get a pretty intense burn, rear delts, upper back. My lumbar is smoked because I'm trying to power build at the same time. But I can't tell you that I ever actually got DOMs in my lats until the last few years. So and it's not that DOMs tells you about growth, it's that it tells you where did you actually produce a little bit of muscle damage, right? Which means that was clearly being activated. There was some, high tension developed, probably along muscle lengths, pretty significant eccentric component. And if that's just never occurring, you could throw a lot of volume on it, but some other weak link in that chain is going to be the limiting factor to what is causing that fatigue. So I think if you think about it, a good exercise, one big component of it is that task failure and the target muscle failure or muscle fatigue are pretty closely aligned. Not perfectly. And you might need to do some things that we'll talk about, like, oh, I'm going to try to do a lengthened partial after I hit fatigue, or I'm going to, shift position and do, scapular shrugs or reverse shrugs or scapular retractions after I'm hitting fatigue and shoulder extensions tapped out because of the nature of the back musculature, which we'll get into. But the point is that I think you can kind of plaster over that hole a little bit with volume, frequency, but if there are certain perpetuated imbalances, or I should say weak points in your back development, like I think you and I saw, Brad, that'll only get you so far.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Could not agree more. Yeah, because that was kind of the evolution. I was implementing things as we learned, And at the time, I mean, really, the only thing we knew was frequency and volume. But yeah, Berto, you got anything to tack on to that?
So you wanted to go over like volume metrics, right? And frequency, right? I mean, those two
Yeah,
things
yeah,
are, yeah.
just kind of what we were doing early on before we kind of learned
Yeah.
about what you learned about, a couple years ago and what Eric just covered.
Well, I think the amount of volume is going to be um, sometimes unintentionally correlated to like what tools do you have accessible, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Exactly.
so like if you have, oh, you got to squat and really only a low bar feels right for you, and you're just not put like together like Russell Orhe, like when you see that dude come down, it's just like cutting down into place where it's like, oh yeah, dude, like those quads are getting sliced up. He could just do that and he'd be fine. Um, Not just for that reason, a number of different reasons. So like, yeah, that matters. And then also the level of effort matters, right? And I think for a lot of us, we thought we were doing RPE 10, but when you take the strength curve into consideration, the way I like to tell people is like, because they're afraid when I start having them do partials, or like, you know what, I think I'm gonna like die in 3 weeks, and it's like, no, bro, you're fine, because literally you've been doing things at like RPE 5, like the amount of partials you can still get to some extent, it's like that's how off you were from the actual RPE 10, right? So and especially early on, you'll see that they can get a lot of partials. As you become more well trained, you can't get nearly as many partials. So this matters, right? Because they'll see that maybe the amount of back volume they thought they needed, like once we started taking the limitations that, again, that are just inherently come with pulling movements into consideration, all of a sudden they're like, oh shoot, like I was doing 25 sets and now I'm doing like 15 sets, and like that's working better than before. So volume and frequency. So again, like the amount of volume you need is going to be in large dependent on like the effort for sure, right? We know this, right? Like because there's a preferential um, uh, uh, option there, like, right? If you just like going to failure and not doing a whole lot of volume, okay, train that way. Or there's some people that like to nibble on the RPs a little bit more, and they want to do more sets. So there's options there, but yeah, primarily take that into consideration is just what do you have access to. Um, if you're all of a sudden being cautious about like the limitations with the strength curve, maybe lower the volume a little bit as like you start performing these like partial reps after full round failure. And then of course, like splitting up the back until it's like many zigzags, right? Like it can get really complicated, but I don't think people need to make it much more complicated than maybe like a horizontal row that's a little bit more shruggy, and then one that's a little bit more T3, T4 like dominant, so it's more depression. And then with the lats, probably you want some sort of row that's like lat dominant. That's very easy. It's probably the easiest one to show people. And then just want to be picky about your vertical pull down. And you start there and then organize that how you like or how you may need it, right? Depending on like what gaps you're missing. Cause like both you and Eric, actually we all missing something in our backs, but they're different. So that would be kind of mismatched and played around with a bit differently in regards to the dosing. But I think you can get lost in the weeds with that. I think a good place to start is just have some stuff that's upper back, some more shruggy, some more depression, and then have a lat row and then have a pull down of choice. Try that for a minute, taking the strength curve into consideration. And I'd say, I don't know, Eric, what do you think? Dose every like one of those exercises at about like 4 to 6 sets a week, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's a decent starting place for most because even when you try to do everything right, the resistance profiles are still pretty crappy. Unless you got like prime equipment, like you can be like, oh, let me do a T-bar row. Because if you think about the lever arm there and when it is, it's better, but it's just I think people would be shocked just at how much weaker you are when you really think about the lockout or the like the chest touch on a row versus extension. Like if you just decide I'm gonna do reps until I can no longer do half a rep, you're gonna get potentially 50% more reps. It's like it's a lot, you know? So yeah, I would agree. If you've got kind of those 4 exercises and you're doing 3 to 4 sets per, and you try to find the best option available, those are going to be a lot more effective than your kind of traditional approach to back training. Um, and especially, I think, one thing that I really like Berto does in bodybuilding program design is he just says, listen, we're going to be closer to failure on all our back work because it's not really muscular failure. It is task failure. If someone's not quite ready to figure out like, okay, what does a lengthened partial look like or how much, form deviation is allowed and what type or when is it okay to put in momentum and when is it not? I think the big difference between kind of how Berto was doing some of his momentum, you'll see some people with bent over barbell rows who it does work for, others it doesn't. And you can tell that they're trying to get in and out of that lengthened position as soon as possible. And I think Berto would always talk about like, oh man, I can feel the tug on my lats from bent over barbell rows. And I don't think back then we had the fidelity or the understanding to see what was effective use of momentum and what was counterproductive. And I look back at the way I did it, and I was kind of like getting right in and out of that lengthened position, couldn't use as heavy of weight, didn't want to, and didn't feel like I was getting much out of it, never felt that tug. And I wasn't actually doing the same exact movement as Berto. But we didn't know the difference. It's just throw some weight on there. So I think if those nuances of technique or access to equipment aren't there, then yeah, getting those kind of 4 bread and butter movements in and then being willing to train all the way to failure on each set, because trust me, you still won't get sore. And doing that, like you said, into 1 to 3 sessions per week, you're good to go. One of the things that I think about frequency is kind of limited by recovery, in my opinion, So if you're never getting sore on something, why not train it again? I think it's kind of the way I started to think about it. And that meant that I could do back like almost every day. Like people have said this before about dumbbell lateral raises. Like I could do them daily. I don't notice anything. I'm never getting middle delt soreness from doing dumbbell lateral raises, right? Same kind of thing, right? But if you tell somebody, I want you to do, hack squats or RDLs daily, they're going to be like, I can't, I can try to acclimate to it. I can do a little more, but even when you do everything perfectly, you build up, you do an intro cycle, some people just simply cannot go into 3 lower body sessions per week without feeling crippled. If each one of those sessions is pushing them close to failure and is creating a lot of stimulus, you can water down each one a little bit and then try to get a little more area under the curve. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like you can manipulate volume intensity, or I should say volume proximity to failure, and frequency in such a way to potentially get the best intersection of the 3. And it's going to look different for everybody. But then, of course, you're going to layer in equipment availability, like Berto said, and then just time availability. Not everyone necessarily could do like I have a home gym, right? And I have a 10-minute walk to AUT. I can choose to do 2-a-day training and think about what's the optimal way to set things up, just limited by my own like work schedule. Most people, I would say, don't have that luxury. So it comes to starting with the constraints, then starting with equipment availability, and then starting with, okay, then what are my physique weak points? What do I need to work on? And then something will come out that looks like that. But I think for your typical bread and butter approach, I would agree, Berto. That's a great place to start and see how it goes.
Hey 3DMJers, this is Coach Jeff Alberts here to remind you that investing in expert guidance is one of the time-tested hallmarks of serious athletes across all sports. And for competitive athletes striving for peak performance, working with an experienced coach isn't just a luxury, it's essential. At 3D Muscle Journey, we understand the dedication it takes to reach your physique and strength goals, and we provide the programming and support to get you there effectively and sustainably. But our craft isn't just for the stage or the platform. We create career-spanning relationships with our clients to guide you along your lifting journey in a stepwise manner. We don't do quick fixes or rush transformations because those will always only be temporary. We know the art and skill of becoming an advanced lifter takes years, and we want to work with athletes who are willing to put in the time. If you want to learn more about all of our coaching plans, systems, and prices, go to our website at 3dmusclejourney.com. We offer weekly coaching for in-season competitors and bi-weekly coaching for off-season or recreational lifters. There are also 3 different time frame options for one-off video calls that each include a training program and nutrition plan every 8 to 16 weeks. Our mission is to create athletic careers for serious lifters, and our one-on-one coaching program is how we do that best. It's more than just workouts and meal plans. We deliver comprehensive support tailored to your individual needs. Don't let another training cycle pass without the expert guidance you deserve. Invest in your athletic future now and sign yourself up for coaching today at 3dmusclejourney.com. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the rest of the show.
You guys kind of took this exactly where I wanted it to go. You jumped ahead a little bit ahead of where I wanted to, but what you guys kind of encapsulated is what I was experiencing between 2014 and 2024 when I made my return to the bodybuilding stage. And one of the reasons that took so long was because at some point I just had to just blow up the whole thing and start over again. Because like we were talking about, that volume and that frequency, it only gets you so far. And what I kind of found out was with that much, I was up to like 22 sets a week of training my lats. And I kind of figured out the hard way, probably because of my thick skull, that the weak link in throwing that much weight around that often with that much volume was my elbows, because my elbows and my biceps just started killing me to the point to where I could not even do curls anymore, and I basically just had to blow the thing up and I had to start over again. And Eric, you and I were just talking about this just here a couple of weeks ago when I came to the point to where it was like, Eric made me think about something that I did not think about. And that was just slowing down the eccentric and starting to feel that tug on my lats. At first, I didn't want to do it. I was very resistant. I'm like, that burns. I don't want to make it slow. I want to hurry up and get it done. But it came to a point where it was like, okay, do I just want to hurry up in the moment and get something done that hurts? Or do I actually want to make improvement to my physique? And that point right there is when I kind of blew the whole thing up. And I says, okay, let's just start over again. Let's just pretend like you don't even know how to train your back. And let's just start from like a pull-up. And let's just do 3-4 sets of pull-ups a week. But go from a dead hang, do failure, basically just keep going until I cannot get my chin up over the bar anymore, and then build from there. And that's kind of what it took for me to realize, oh, wait a minute. Now I know what Jeff's talking about. These are 4 quality sets as opposed to 22. Let's just hurry up and get the work done because it hurts. And now I'm actually sore, And that was the start of kind of the evolution of, okay, now I need to actually break this movement down and figure out, how do I make my lats do the work? How do I make my lats pull my body up to, the bar? And it was a slow evolution, but over time, I was able to start doing my rows that way. I was able to start doing my pull downs that way. I started figuring out for watching Alberto, oh, I got to get this kind of middle segment here, kind of in between a pull down and a row, and really kind of get to that point to where, okay, there comes a certain point where I'm still training my lat, but I don't really have to use my elbow that much. Like you talked about, Eric, I can just do scapular retraction and hit that part of the muscle. And so what that has essentially ended up getting me from what I feel like I got on my physique was now I'm getting depth on my back, not just width, which is what volume and frequency kind of eventually got me to. But now I'm actually starting to get depth. I'm starting to get that turtle shell that Berto kind of was looking like back in when you last competed, Berto, 2023 or 2022 or whatever. And then of course the Berto started going over all the targeted ways of hitting your lats and twisting your body in certain ways to get more of a lengthened portion. And then that emoji of the little brain exploding went off in Brad's brain and says, "Oh wow, now I can really start building on this foundation that I just blew up." So yeah, I guess Berto, that was kind of a good segue to you when you started really kind of looking at all those different angles and all those different things that you were learning, during that prep. I mean, that's still there today. I don't want to, sound like I'm bowing down or blowing smoke up your ass or anything, but it's still there, and it's still getting better. What was that aha moment for you when you kind of like had to think like Brad did? I got to blow this up and kind of start over again.
Well, again, it's like when you first start out, a lot of it's just trial and error. It's like you get in there and it's probably advisable that you work as hard as possible because you could have the perfect plan, but if you're not working hard, like that ain't going nowhere. So, just getting after it enthusiastically, I think that matters a lot. You get some things right, some things wrong, but then sometimes the information, no matter who it comes from, like fuck, I think the evidence-based, like, world kinda messed up my back for a minute there because 'cause I'm like, "Yeah, I gotta be a good example. I gotta, like, be super strict," you know? But, there was certain aspects of what I was doing before, but that felt right too, and I can't explain to you with, like, 100% certainty, like, why. I just know it did, but I just know I can't do that either, so let me go down this route that, it might not be better, but at least it's sustainable, right? So, I think for me, what really it was like just the iliac, like, pull down, like, it becoming so, like, offensive and like a meme. All of a sudden, I was like, just it got me really thinking about it. I think, obviously, Kaz was, like, one of the more influential people when it comes to, like, doing this doing this right, and, there's a lot of games of, like, telephone, like, outside of that. But I think what got me looking in his direction is I remember it was a video about, like, the scapula and how, like, like, maybe you shouldn't, like, focus too much on keeping it pinned back. And, so anyways, like, bottle, rabbit hole, went down that rabbit hole, and I'm like, "Oh, shoot, this is starting to connect with a lot of, like, my real life experiences." I'm starting to see why I had such a much better back, like, in the 2000s as opposed to, like, the 2010s. And obviously because it's I think, 1, I'm a moderately high responder to training, the muscle memory, so as soon as I apply these things, these more refined ways of doing the things I was doing before, right? It's like cocoa plant versus, like, cocaine, if you will, right? Like that's literally what it is. Like, the barbell row works, but that's gonna be a whole lot of, like, cocoa plant you're gonna have to ingest to get the effects of, just whatever it is you want, right? Um it worked, like, within, like, a month, I'm like, "Oh, there it goes." Like, that's what I've been looking for, like, I could literally feel it in my back when I'm sitting, like, I'm like, "Oh, that's right, like, my elbows used to hit my lats." Like, what, right? So, so yeah, yeah, I think, and then again, this is why this is kind of taking a weird turn, but I think that's why you got to be open to listening to everyone. Like for me, I am not gifted enough as an athlete where I'm just going to listen to, like, what Ronnie Coleman says and Dorian Yates says, right? I need to, like, pay attention to, like what, like, both people are trying to tell you because, like, Kaz looks nothing like Dorian Yates, but he got me my back, in a much more refined, sustainable way. So, and it's fun to learn biomechanics, man. It's like it's fun to drive the car, but like we all signed up for working out here, and it's all these other things we had to add, like the sleeping, the eating, that we're like, geez, like I don't like this part, but I need to do these things to keep the training going because I really love training. And like, here's your chance to, like, pop that hood open, like really look at what's under there and, like, make your car better and funner to drive. So, um, So the biomechanics revolution has been great, and I think especially when it comes to back, like the angles absolutely matter. Understanding the limitations of the equipment you have access to, so that you can make it better through like lengthened partials or like upsets absolutely matters. And again, this doesn't like dishonor like the people who've praised things like bent over rows or even like the deadlift. I can see why it's worked. We can explain it through science why it's worked. As a matter of fact, the next thing I'm curious about playing around with is having some sort of hinge pattern after my back movement, because I think it makes sense to leave the most stretchiest thing towards the end. So I believe people when they're like, yeah, I started to deadlift and certain layers of my back that are most exposed when the bar's out there just really morphed. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe there's maybe something there. And that's probably the next thing I'm gonna play with is yeah, just some hinging at the end of a back workout, see what that does. But yeah, that was my aha moment, was just basically connecting it to things that worked per like these more like sophisticated, well thought out ideas, and then kind of having both of those things meet in the middle.
Brad, can I say a little something about kind of the probably some of the issues with the way people were viewing science at the time, where I think we were also engaging with it?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's two things that contribute to why your typical kind of evidence-based bro would struggling here. One, it's strict form, full range of motion, right? Which are generally good principles, uh, but will cause issues if you have assumptions about those just being carte blanche better, regardless of resistance profile. Um, so that's one thing. The other thing is there is not a single study that exists that has measured hypertrophy in the lats. We don't have that. We probably will in the future, but it's not a muscle that is conducive to being able to assess hypertrophy because it's broad spanning. There's so many different muscles, they overlap. If you want to look at muscle thickness, you're not sure which compartment or what you're looking at. Where do you do it? How do you standardize it? I mean, the back is so broad. So using an ultrasound to do this, you'd have to figure out, okay, well, I need some landmarks. And then the variation between individuals in where those landmarks will put you on someone's lat are pretty broad as well. And we're only now getting to the point where we potentially have the ability to do some other techniques like MRI, and then actually being able to use AI to kind of take a look at that. There's some cool stuff like Springbok, a few other things, but I think we're a few years off before we actually have hypertrophy studies on it. So the typical evidence-based bro who checks out PubMed ID, drops it, and goes, "No, here's the study that shows how to train X, Y, and Z," or here's the EMG thing that I've misguided, told you is there. There's not even a lot of EMG work on the back. There's some, but people are arguing over like 3 studies. So those things, plus the thing that I've been trying to fight against for my entire career, is people mistaking an absence of evidence for evidence of absence, or basically clinging too tightly to research. And put simply, being truly evidence-based is you're using the best available evidence to inform your decision making. So in a field of study where we don't have any hypertrophy data on the back, it's very challenging to actually even get it in the first place. We have to default backwards. And it's not default all the way to Ronnie Coleman's unbelievable and like, oh, he's got 8 Olympias. Let me go with that. Oh, shoot, Lee Haney's got 8. So maybe I take what they say, and that's slightly above Arnold because he's got 7. Like that's not what I'm saying. We're going to default to maybe an anatomy textbook or an understanding of biomechanical principles or indirect research, right? And I think that was just something that was really absent, and also a space filled by a lot of charlatans. Because for every person who is accurately and intelligently giving us principles of training that are based upon the best available evidence, which is limited, unfortunately, and is largely based upon, say, foundational biomechanics, there's somebody else who's talking about, primal patterns or making up things. And it's very difficult to discern who's who because they don't necessarily have that more clearly defined academic kind of background. You're not going to see many biomechanists or anatomists even who have like, a master's degree or a PhD who are then going to extrapolate and go out on a limb. It's kind of the personalities conflict. So, like, for example, you can talk about the lats in subdivisions, the thoracic lats, the iliac lats. Like, that's a thing you can do, but it's not technically like, you won't find that in an anatomy textbook. That's something that's kind of come out of the trenches going, okay, we got our lumbar lats, we got our thoracic lats, we got our iliac lats. Those are describing the anatomical regions and probably what they do based upon the wide spanning attachment to the lats and the type of motions and where's the tension can be applied. And I think those are probably useful ways of describing it, but you're not going to pick up strength training anatomy and see that. It's just the lats, right? And that's not necessarily right because it's in a textbook or that's all we have. So it is challenging. Like, that means we have to extrapolate beyond what the typical safety blanket of your evidence-based bro is. And I include myself in that, you know. But I think as you understand the broader biomechanics principles, you understand actually how does muscle grow. Like, it's not growing uniformly. You can see regional hypertrophy. It depends upon where is the tension applied. And yeah, there's a lot of ability to propagate tension laterally and longitudinally within structures, but it all starts to make sense when you start to see how certain people have underdeveloped regions of their back and just how many muscles are involved and how many things can contribute to the same movement. So I guess what I would say is it has been murky just because people are not good at using the best available evidence. If it's not in PubMed, they don't really know what to do. And then it becomes like anecdote, bro science. But there's definitely something to be said for high quality anecdotes and an understanding of empirical, but not necessarily longitudinal hypertrophy research, because we just don't have it on the back. So I think you need to not fall into the trap of going, yeah, show me the long-term hypertrophy study. That's a great default position to be in when that can be done. But what if we have a muscle group we can't measure? You know, are you just going to not make a decision or to stick rigidly to what you've done previously, regardless of the fact that you're got a shitty back? I decided that was a bad move eventually. So I would encourage the same of everyone else. So yeah.
And so often it kind of comes down to when we don't have, okay, there's, like you said, Eric, I never really even thought about that, but we have different cross-sectional biopsies and measurements of the vastus lateralis in the leg and, you know, different the bicep, the segments, you know, and things like that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, how can you get a good cross-sectional measurement of the lat, you know? Biopsy, that's awful precarious. You know, there's this very valuable organ called the lung that's kind of right underneath there, you know? That's awful hard to biopsy. But what ends up happening a lot of times is we just have to kind of, like you said, Eric, we can't just blindly go down the road and just hope for the best, right? We got to take the best evidence that we have. And some of that's going to kind of boil down to anecdotal evidence. And so we start looking at things and we start saying, okay, well, you know what? Okay, we want to make sure that we're getting that loaded stretch on the lat as often as we can and really initiate the biomechanical pattern of using the lat to kind of get the load going and whatnot. And then we kind of build upon that and we kind of say, okay, well, you know what? Maybe we do just keep going after failure, you know, since the shortened portion is arguably, it's not that it's not effective. It's just, it's not as, I don't know what you want to call it. Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, hypertrophic or whatever, you know. So let's just keep going, you know, and so we kind of start piecing together these different things. And then that's when kind of like that anecdotal kind of like personal, the results happen. We can't do a biopsy, but when a client comes back to me and their back is noticeably wider and I'm like, what are you doing different? Well, you told me to go to 1 failure repetition, but instead I do 10. Oh, well, that's interesting. How long have you been doing that? Well, pretty much since we last left off, you know? Oh, well, that's interesting. What do you think about your back? I think it's wider. Well, I would agree with you. Now we got 2 people that kind of have agreed upon the same thing. You know, that's the kind of anecdotal evidence where we're kind of using these things that make sense and piecing it together and applying a plan with a desired outcome to it. And I mean, if nothing else, that's kind of what I have learned when I can't have this evidence, I can at least kind of start piecing things together. And of course, rely on my 3DMJ think tank to kind of start, clarifying and putting things together so that I can actually make a plan for somebody. But yeah, I mean, that was one thing that was kind of an aha moment for me, is like, okay, you know what? Okay, I don't necessarily have to stop when I've failed. I Once I can't get my bar over my chin over the bar on the chin up, it's not like anything after that's junk. I've kind of learned I can kind of keep going. And when we talk about biomechanics, it's it, to me it's fascinating how that varies from person to person. And Eric, you kind of mentioned this in the past in one of either our other podcasts or maybe our other discussions. But I'll have somebody that I'm training with, and I'm like, okay, I want you to just keep going. Okay, just keep going. And I'm like, how are you keep going? And they're like, I don't know. I just keep pulling my scapulars together. I spread them apart and I put them together. And I'm like, dude, I can only get 3 of those. How are
Hmm.
you still doing that? So, yeah, kind of talk about that a little bit,
Sure.
Eric. How come is it that I can only get like 3 or 4 dissolving partials and someone else just keeps going?
Yeah, I get a ton. Um, so yeah, I think you're rarely going to see this on a chest press, for example. Like if you go to full range of motion concentric failure on a chest press, barbell bench press, incline dumbbell, etc., push-ups even, and then you go, all right, let me see how many half reps I can get. The next rep will be a half rep. The next rep will be barely off your chest. And the next one will be just holding it right there and you're done for almost everybody, right? Um, and that is true for several muscle groups, but there are certain, I'm going to say muscle groups very intentionally, um, like because multiple muscles are providing the same service and some of them are going to fatigue earlier. So you can see this in squat patterns to some degree. Some people are going to shift more back into their posterior chain. Some people are going to find a way to shift back and then forward to get more into their quads. Um, you can sometimes find people with really well developed quads and not great development in maybe their glutes or vice versa. Um, and the same thing you will also see in the upper body is in the back. You can get people who have like they have to do a whole lot to try to take their biceps out of a movement, or you can watch them as they get closer and closer to failure. You notice they're starting to kick their elbows out a bit more on the free weight row. So like the reason I bring that up and to bring it back specifically to the lats is like if you keep your elbow really tight to your body and you're pulling from your elbow and kind of towards your pocket, it's very difficult for other muscle groups to actually contribute. But if you're not keeping an eye on that and it's just kind of let's get the bar from point A to point B, you can do a row, you can do a pull down where it becomes much more flared. And now you're bringing in other muscle groups. You're getting a little more rear delt, you're getting a little more rhomboid, mid trap. Biceps are probably doing the same thing either way. But nonetheless, how you perform these movements and then also just your natural recruitment patterns and the relative strengths of different muscles is going to all conglomerate together and along with limb lengths, which is individual, to produce different fatigue patterns. So I was doing this when I did a seminar in Taiwan, which was a lot of fun, small group of folks. And what we did was we jumped on a cable row and we went to failure, chest supported. So you really couldn't mess around with it too much. And then after we went to failure, we just did scapular shrugs. And in that cohort of 6 people, if we added myself, there were some people who could get 3, and there are some people who could get the same number of reps they did initially to hit failure. So, for example, we were doing failure in the 10 to 12 rep range. I was then getting 10 to 12 more scapular retractions. So we would go all the way to the point where we could not get a lengthened partial. And then we were just doing shrugs. And the amount of shrugs people were getting is look like a new movement starting for some people, but other people, almost nothing left. And anecdotally, I've also seen that the people who I've seen, and it's, a small sample size, but interesting nonetheless, the people who can get barely any shrugs after the rows, they tend to have better backs, or at least better lats, which makes sense. Like, what is one of the limiting muscles that is resulting in task failure? I think, for me, I get a pretty big bicep burn when I'm doing all rows and all pull downs. I can go thumb over, I can get my versigrips, it helps a little, but I've always had pretty good arms. But my lats have been something I've had to work very hard to develop. And that makes sense, So I think that's just one example. But ultimately, what we're thinking about here is, how do we manipulate either the structure of the sets, reps, the proximity to failure, or even the position or the way we're performing exercises to get to the point where we are actually putting some stimulus through that muscle. And the good news is that even though we don't have studies on the lats, we have studies on a whole lot of other muscle groups. And there are definitely consistent things that we know, okay, this is how muscle grows. So some people in this kind of hazy absence of evidence, they will over extrapolate. Like, okay, we're already playing around in biomechanics land. We don't have longitudinal studies. So I'm going to make some assumptions about the length tension relationship. And I'm going to tell you that this is good for this muscle group, but not for this one. And sometimes they'll do that in the face of better evidence. So the thing is, once we shift outside of the back, where we got this valley of no direct hypertrophy research, we have direct hypertrophy research on the biceps, triceps, pecs, hamstrings, glutes, quads, and calves. We've got it, and even a little bit on the delts. And the thing that you will see across all of those muscle groups and all of the studies looking at longitudinal hypertrophy that we have is that all studies that have measured longitudinal hypertrophy either find that a superior resistance profile, where it is harder at the lengthened position, or performing lengthened partials versus shortened partials, so just performing the lengthened position, all seem to benefit or be neutral for hypertrophy outcomes. And I can show you studies, and if we think about sampling variance, like the likelihood with these small sample sizes that we would see all neutral to positive outcomes, it means that we're probably seeing something around a small to moderate true effect in the research based upon how that splits out. So you might see someone saying, no, it doesn't apply to the glutes. No, it doesn't apply to the arms. I'm like, well, it probably does. And that's what we have. So if it probably applies to all muscle groups, I'm confident in thinking it probably applies to the lats as well. And if anything, more so, based upon kind of the resistance profile of the typical exercise that we're looking at. So then we go, okay, so what do we got on the table? What tools do we have? All right, cool. Well, we can do lengthened partials. We can try to find a way to manipulate, if I think about the origin and the attachment of this muscle group, how do I get a longer position? Because that seems to be helpful. How do I stretch it a bit more? And this is where I think creativity and people digging into textbooks and learning anatomy and thinking about it in the trenches and the experience of what it feels like and sensation is really interesting. Because I never thought about it that, yeah, like a full range of motion lat pull down is great, but if I wanted to actually stretch my lat or my back, I would be bringing my arm across my body, right? Because I'm a 3D dimensional person, like my lat inserts on the humerus, it attaches back, it also attaches on the scapula. If I'm reaching kind of across my body a little bit, so long as I'm not turning my trunk and I keep my trunk straight, maybe I have a chest supported row, wow, I feel a much bigger stretch on my lat. And so that type of thing, it takes you out of the ivory tower of PubMed and gets you to stop reading PDFs. And it takes those principles, and then you have to go to the gym. And you sit down and you go, okay, how do I manipulate the chest pad? Or how do I think about my position on this movement? Where would I put the cable to where it gives me the greatest stretch on the target muscle or allows me to apply a high level of effort through a range of motion that is the most I can get out of it? And what tools do I have available to me to make it a little harder in that initial portion of the range? And now all of a sudden you have a mission, you have a goal, you have principles that you can utilize. How do I increase the range of motion? How do I get more tension in the lengthened position? And then what do I have available to me? So you have constraints. And that's where I think it gets really fun. You go to your gym and you go, okay, So I'll give one example. I've got this Life Fitness row that is a chest supported row that you sit down on. And it is challenging, like right at the not the very beginning, but like 10% of the range into the range of motion. So instead of sitting on it, I move the seat so that I can kneel and grab it. So the start is right at that point where it's hard. And I do this single arm kneeling row and I get all kinds of weird looks, but I tell you what, man, that gives me the gnarliest tug right at the start of that row. And I can have two different grips on it. There's like kind of like the quote unquote rear delt grip, or there's the quote unquote back grip. And I use that back grip and I position myself so that I can keep my elbow real tight to my side. And I adjust the height on the bench so that I can get it so it's like perfectly in line with where I want it to be. And I wouldn't ever have thought to have done that if I didn't have those principles in place when I went to the gym, because I knew what I was trying to get to. But I had all my tools that are available, the traditional tools, the kind of prefabricated tools, aren't the best one to suit to the purpose I'm trying to get. So anyway, that was a bit of a tirade, but I think that is kind of what we're doing. Like, okay, we've got this murky, not great evidence, but what we do know is the following. So cool, let's put that to play.
Berto, and that was something that you were doing. It was kind of fun to watch you come up with what you were coming up with when you were making those improvements to your back. Because I was, and it, believe me, at the time, Berto, I'm not gonna feel like I knew what was going on. I was going, what in the hell is he doing? Why is he twisting his body, you know, and pulling across his body, and because I just at the time it was just in its infancy, and I hadn't been exposed to it yet. But yeah, that was kind of fun watching you go through that. Kind of talk us through how that was for you as you were trying to figure out how to contort yourself into these positions to get the most stretch and take advantage of your biomechanics.
Yeah, well, like Eric said, at a certain point, I mean, you always go back to studying, right? You gotta dedicate, some time to, yeah, to, I guess, watching film, the football equivalent. But then there's the time to go in there and try it out. And so here's the thing: like every other sport, I think they understand two things. Like there is this kind of standard way of like doing things, and I think there's a lot of like just young people who want to get everything right. They're afraid to get shit wrong. That they look to science as like the surefire way of doing so. But like any like a great contributor to our fields would tell you is like, no, bro, like we're here to be corrected. Like that's the point of science. Like we look forward to being corrected over time. So there isn't research for everything. Like think of Xander playing lineman, right? Like there's all these angles and stuff that like work and we know they work. Uh, there's no paper written on that like this is the best way for DE to like come around, the offensive line. They just do it. But guess what? And then there's also like individuals that break those rules, right? Like I know this from track and field. Like a French guy, I use him as an example a lot. And no one fixed his form because this dude was breaking 10. I think he only did it once, but nevertheless, one foot was forward, one was like a skateboard. You ain't teaching anyone to do that, but that's what worked, like that's what worked for like how he was put together. So, again, it's like, this is where it's like, you get out there, you try. At some point, someone was like, you know what, Usain Bolt, that little sway you got going, we wouldn't teach that to someone, but it's working really well. We're not
You
fixing it.
keep
This is how
going, yeah.
you're put together. Yeah. And back musculature is just so unique from person to person. Like my trap 4 on my right side, I think one side attaches lower than the other. So like I just have to be okay with that. Like if I'm doing like an upper back thing that's a little bit more like there's more depression taking place and shrugging, it's just gonna have to. And guess what? Even like if any sort of row, any sort of press, as a matter of fact, I'm kind of doing this, and I'm okay with that. So it's just fun. Like get in there and like Eric said, it's almost, especially for the back, is like you try to figure out like how can I stretch this movement in the most this muscle in the most guess stabilized way possible. That's really what it comes down to it. And a great like tower and a bench, it's like, bro, you could be there all day, just having your little like science experiment going. And it's very easy to figure out. It's like where I feel the stretch. That's probably what's going to redirect the muscle once you do start your concentric. So yeah, back training is fun because it's so unique to everyone. Like heck, I suck at doing anything overhead, and because I learned biomechanics, or at least what I needed to know, like now it all makes sense. Like overhead pressing never felt good for me. Overhead, like pulling down directly overhead, never felt good to me. So, yeah, everyone is put together slightly different enough where you have to take that into consideration. But again, you have to play like within the rules of like what we know about like science. Like, and that's that the longer muscle length probably really important if you want to put on muscle, that you load that you take that part of the range of motion to failure. But like after that, it's like, dude, like zigzag with your movements, however, like your body was kind of like meant. Like with you, Brad, I can only imagine, dude, like you got that S-shaped spine, like, right? So yeah, that's the fun part of anything, is just like seeing if any of this works, and it's fun to be corrected because we won't know what we know. Like all the stuff like we know, it's because at some point we were corrected. And yeah, it bums you out the first few times, but like, boy, like I think all of us here, we've gotten to the point where it's like, man, I can't wait to be corrected on something today.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so yeah, it's
Oft-
just fun, dude. It's just bodybuilding
Oftentimes,
at the end.
oftentimes correction ends up being improvement at some point.
Yeah.
You know, that was largely what I attributed my early, you know, this all what we're talking about here. These early epiphanies I had was Eric correcting me, saying, "Brad, you know, I think you need to slow down on that eccentric instead of just letting it go." And at first it was like, "No, I don't want to do that." But then eventually it was like, that's probably going to end up making me better in the long run. And sure enough, it did. But yeah, Alberto, speaking of that S-shaped spine of mine, I've literally remember pretty vividly playing in here like for a whole day one time, just taking my bench, putting it on the floor, you know, pulling on it, tugging on it. Oh yeah, that feels pretty good. Let me move it a little bit more. Oh, that's too far. You know, now I can't even really get that lower Latin gaze and move it back a little bit. Thought I had it perfect. You know, put a little mark on the floor there. Okay, let's measure. Let's get it the same way on the other side. Didn't even feel the same way. So when I do my cross body pull downs, I have to kind of like put the bench at a certain position on one arm, and then I got to put it in a different position on the other arm. If anybody else saw me doing that, they would think I was absolutely not. Heck, if I saw myself from about 15 years ago seeing me do that, I'd be like, Brad, what in the hell are you doing? Does it even matter? Well, guess what, Brad from the future? It does matter. You'll find out. So, but I think the last thing I want to touch on, you guys, is kind of the 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 evaluation of performance over time, because that's one thing that I did learn early on when I was starting from scratch, doing a dead hang pull up. I can just see it now already. There's gonna be bodybuilders all over just going dead hang pull ups. They're stopping all the way and doing their pull ups from a dead hang from now on. But anyways, I I had no overload plan in place. I had no progression plan in place. It was just an outcome. First couple times that I did it, like I told you, I was doing 2 sets one day, 2 sets another day, kind of progressed that to 3. Eventually, I just got kind of tired of doing pull-ups. But what I just kind of found is over the course of those 3 kind of 2 failure pull-ups, they slowly improved over time. So it's like I'm looking at the last set and it was 3 reps. Now it's 5 reps. Now it's 5.5 reps. And then slowly it's getting to 7. And all the while, the other ones are kind of starting to improve a little bit too. I didn't have a plan in place. It's just that I noticed through doing pull-ups, training hard, making sure that I hit failure every time, well, I shouldn't say every time. It was slowly, or it was kind of every time at the beginning, but it started to flatten out and I could see just slow improvements to where that failure repetition went up over time. And it correlated with what I was kind of seeing on my back. It's looking a little bit more dense. When I pull my arm across, it's kind of popping out off from, away from my back just a little bit more. And I think that's probably one of many ways that we all kind of evaluate performance over time and the ability to progress. But yeah, talk about that on your guys' front. How do you kind of look at, all of the little fishes there and see what's improving and which ones are getting faster and evaluating performance.
Yeah. I think this is one that if someone is coming from a traditional kind of back training approach to some of the stuff we're talking about, this is where they get a little confused, nervous, or just hesitant, or even resistant to applying some of these techniques. And the thing I would just urge people to think about conceptually is it's all arbitrary. We make up the idea of sets, reps. That wasn't a natural thing. The point of a full range of motion, the point of failure. So you can also arbitrarily decide to change it and you can track it. So the easiest way that I can recommend people just start tracking their performance on back training is, okay, let's say you took your notes on this podcast episode. Berto gave you those 4 movements. You're going to start doing those. You're going to go in the gym with all the principles that I mentioned, and you're going to select your exercises and manipulate them a little bit and make sure that you're stable. You've got a long range of motion, and ideally you can make the resistance profile as hard as possible at the beginning phase. Most of the time, though, it's still going to be easier at the beginning phase. So what you can do, very simple, is that you define failure as the point when you can no longer do half a repetition. And I think that's really easy, right? So that means if you might start with, you got, let's say come some kind of single arm lat pull down where you're pulling slightly across the body, you're sitting at an angle on the lat pull down, you got your D handle, and you're going to try to get each one to where your fist is right below your chin. Once your elbow can no longer reach your chin, it's a good reference point. That is now the point where you hit failure. So you're counting partials. You don't have to necessarily count the full range, then the partials, and then how much of a partial. It's just, okay, listen, a 10 RPE or a 0 RIR on this movement is when I can't get my elbow to my chin. And that's just the new arbitrary line in the sand. And then you'll be able to see that same level of progression that you would track on a chest press or a dumbbell press, where you're strictly saying, listen, if I can't rack it, if I can't lock it out, then it doesn't count. You're just kind of defining that position in a way that is more in line with your goals as a bodybuilder, of going, well, I don't want to just do it until I can't get my fist to my chin, because I could do another 10 reps if I let it be my elbow. And you can have that on every single one of your movements. And then just like, Brad said, if you are applying overload, you will eventually see progress. And if you are applying that overload and you're not seeing progress, and you're also not getting sore, and you're doing everything else right in terms of sleep, calorie surplus, and stress management, and macronutrient intake and all that other fancy good, gardener stuff that you need to make your muscle plants grow, then maybe you just need to do more, or you need to have someone take a look at your technique and see maybe you're way off from what you think you're doing. But that's how I do it. I think it's very simple that way. And I think people can get a little too caught up in like, well, is it the 30%? Is it 50%? It's like, just find a good landmark. It's roughly around half a rep. And that's going to make sure that you're getting some of that exposure to high tension and being close to failure at longer muscle lengths.
Berto, do you kind of quantify that in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah, I think it helps me that I'm not as analytical as like most bodybuilders. Like, I don't know how I got here sometimes. So I've always seen it as, like, when I used to hit a good squat PR, like, I knew my leg extension was going to suck after. And I was fine with that. I'm like, why does it suck? Because I just did something I've never done on the squat, right? So,
yeah.
So the way I kind of have it set up for people is like, we'll do like this like full ROM set. It's just traditional. Like, no one at the gym thinks you're weird yet. How many reps can you get? That's the one we gauge progress by. And then everything else afterwards, we're going to go like RPE 10 plus partials. Don't track the partials because they're all really different anyways. Just as a matter of fact, probably don't track it all. If it bothers you that much, just track that first set. And this other thing, just dance basically. And just go until, your set ends at the portion we decided is like, you're done, right? And that's going to vary from person to person. Like, if someone is pretty new, I probably won't have them dissolve the range of motion like too much. Because I mean, think about it. You have someone new, never lifted before, they could probably make all sorts of like great progress on a bench press on like RPE 7. They're fine. Like, no issue. Like, if anything,
They don't even got to do this.
keep
Yeah.
them there. So if someone's always been like this squeezer and like has never taken like a rep that was slightly controversial, probably with them, you want to ease them into that. And then, but with other folks that, maybe they're like Mr. Bent over row, like I was, and, they have some experience. Okay, you can go a little bit further than that, and maybe even get to the point where in the final set, it's just like the scapular motion, right? But yeah, I think just having one set that's like a set that like is your proxy set, right? It's like this is where you gather data as to whether this is working or not. Same thing with like myo rep sets. That's what I do with people. It's like just myo reps, just do them as long as like everything afterwards is like a third to a quarter of the activation buy-in set. Like we're watching the myo set, the first one. We're watching that one, and of course, like within the context of like the overall program, because guess what? Even though we kind of segregated these portions of the back, if I had an awesome day on my upper back row, and then I'm like, now I'm doing something for my lats, but I killed it on the upper back row. Like I can't believe I lifted this weight. Like, wow, I'm texting Cynthia, I got this PR. Like, guess what? Like the other back movement, because it's still being contaminated, even though it's upper back with some of the lower lat fibers, like it might like also not do as well today, and that's okay. So I think that's something to take into consideration. It's like you can't track everything all the time, and if anything, the only way you can do that is to like really scan back. But yeah, very very similar. Like just full arm set. I think just first set, and like you're good. If it's working, like that should go up in both load and reps over time.
Yeah. Wow, Berto, such an out of the box thinker. I love it. Got a new little toy that I'm gonna get to play with now. So
And it's nice because people don't have to track everything, right? Because sometimes it's so hard to get people to track their progress, and it's like just track the first one.
Just track this one, and the rest of it, go in there and have fun and work hard.
And
I like it.
just work really hard. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, you get
Awesome.
your benchmark that you can use. That also works great. I really like that as you were talking about it, because then you have sets to kind of keep a certain control over and you're going to failure. So it's in this constrained thing, you're doing as much as you can on the other stuff, but we're not going to worry about tracking it. And then, hey, if that is working, we should see your traditional row improve. Love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, guys, I'm holding up my little sticky book, and all of my items are crossed off. So I don't have anything else to add to it. How about you guys? Do you have anything to add?
Not me. I think we did a great job covering that.
No, I think that
All
same
right.
lane of thinking could just apply to everything else we're doing, because we just
Good
got
point.
like, because back is such a big muscle group that impacts your look, and it plays by these weird rules. Just it's a great lesson built into this, like when it comes to like everything else that you do have going on. And again, it's just okay to be wrong, to like take some chances, to try some things out. Like that's the fun part. Like there's no, I know a lot of people who are like just they're exercise scientists, but they always have something running, it seems, in their program that they have just for fun because they fucking love it. Can you justify to me why you're doing that? Nah, it just gets me all sorts of giddy, and I look forward to doing it every week. And then there's another thing that they're usually doing that, like, why are you doing that? I don't know. Like, I want to see if it works. Like, it might not. I really don't care. Just trying some shit out. So, yeah, just try some shit out.
All right, you guys. Well, thanks for joining me today. I think it's time that I get back to work. Ha ha. And gentlemen, I want to let you get back to what you were doing. So until next time, thanks for listening to the 3DMJ podcast.